one of many numerous reminders to guard your will, intellect, and emotion. And while doing that, I've forgotten to mention to keep my way guarded within the intellectual and motivational areas of my life. Specifically the element of not expecting anything. Because that's a big part of confusion and self-doubt. Those two rarely exist without that. Because when you expect something, it's a matter of the level of tolerance and patience resolving the situation most of the time versus you preemptively eradicating it from not expecting anything to begin with. There's really no way to get disappointed that way. And it's not really normal human behavior, so you can't beat yourself up or think that you're lacking in character or anything. It's just a survival tactic. It's not going to work 100% of the time because these circumstances are not natural, and so therefore it's not the best approach to just regular everyday living. But what the fuck is that? What the fuck is normal now? But yeah, just if I'm really going to try to get on this whole tip about my way of doing shit, I just gotta always keep it in mind. And that's where they're getting me, is that element of expecting things. Every now and then. It's almost as if they have to put extra effort into it for me to even commit to a thought, just so they can turn around and say, oh, nope. You know, it's really petty to even take a note of or do to someone. But it is what it is. It is important. So now that I've taken a note, I won't forget as often. Within that whole cycle of create a state of confusion, instill self-doubt, and lower self-esteem, you will often find heterodyning techniques taking place. And it's amazing how short of an encounter can combine all these things. So you can imagine how an extended period of time mixing with the correct and desired technique and result. And a surefire way to identify this heterodyning taking place, which is also representative or representing a lot of other techniques that do the same thing, in which you create a positive and a negative environment where a subject has to rise above it. And the way you can quickly and easily identify this happening is when you hear a group of people or two people talking back and forth, or one person mentioning a good thing and then immediately a bad thing. Good thing, bad, good, good, bad. So the quicker you can catch on to it, the quicker you'll hopefully lessen the effect of it. I want to try to expand and simply conceptualize as basic as possible this entire concept of the intricacies of time and space being utilized to the advantage and disadvantage of certain people dispensating knowledge. I'm going to try to work within the frame of reference of my previous recordings to explain it and decipher it as best as I can. On a real basic level, time only exists in the conscious mind as a viewpoint, per se, that we all have a consensus on, especially with the regimenting and documenting of it in our modern civilization. It leads me to believe that there was a time where this wasn't so. And it's even documented in the history that we have available to us. You have to understand that it's not that documenting time wasn't something that ever occurred. It's just that there was groups of people around that didn't do it at all. And there was existing balance within the people who did document time, having a sort of a vibration within them that still was in harmony with various things relating to people who didn't keep up or document time. And that brings me to some of these previous recordings of how they use the framework of the story of Jesus, which represents I am, which represents Christ, which represents the presence of grace, which represents the infinite awareness that we manifest through our external lives. How it's perpetually kept us in the same framework within that story that enables certain things to happen within our psyche, which affects our behavior and outlook on the world that we live in, with us constantly portraying the image of what covertly represents infinite awareness and presence of grace and the present moment being crucified on a cross of all symbols. And how I said that they keep us in that loop, like we all continue to live the same way and the characters are just recreated, like someone going into a dream and they have all these characters come into the dream and they're just representing or representing people in their life, and it just continues over and over though, and these people multiply and the ratio continues. Say there's a group of people in that dream. That dream had a group of people that it represented previously that is now larger because the population has grown. That's a reality. That's how I see it. Because in order for evil to operate the way it operates, it has to operate within a certain framework within our perception that we have to have a consensus on. It can all be individualized and differing, but it all has to have common ground in which we agree on certain things that affect us into creating environment in which malevolence ciphers off the energy of benevolence through manipulation of their actions. And it's like they continue to play the same scenes over and over. And we're living within that reality in a loop so much that it's created religions that go back to pagan rituals like Wicker Man, and it creates mentalities in which people do that symbolically. And what created that entire energy field of manifesting manipulated advantages, it's like it all comes from a place of misinterpreted knowledge and capitalizing on that and continuing to until the motives and reasons behind it are blinded just from it becoming regular occurrence and creating jobs and ways of life and mistranslated religious texts and things like that. But as I said, so many people have worded it in so many different ways as far as the dynamics of who we deem to be power simply maneuvering through manipulation. But the way they do it is they, over this time that they've decided to keep us in a loop in, ever since they've decided to do that and then continue to recreate the characters over these thousands of years, the way they accomplish this is it's similar to, as I've said before, watching a movie and continuing to play the same scenes over and over in the middle of the movie and not continuing it for it so it'll never finish. So it's like always the scenes that paint the malevolent figure in the movie as having the most power to give the viewers who don't know that they're actually participating in the movie the perception that they have. or, you know, reading the same chapters in the middle of the book. It's all the same effect, and it just keeps looping over and over and over. But it's a little different because what we're representing as the presence of grace, being I am, is infinite. It has no end. That's what's so beautiful about it. And that's what's beyond unfortunate in this situation. But it ultimately represents something that can't die and lives within us regardless. It's just the perception that people create on a mass scale. All this regimenting and documenting and allotting different things that are necessary, I guess. I mean, they're something that can't be done without at this point. As far as time zones and all this, I mean, it's not all bad. Everything's everything, so everything is a big reminder of something else sometimes, just as it's a replica or a similar occurrence or a potential distortion or representation of a bad or good outcome of something that's not finished yet. But it's evident, even if you look at it with no symbolism in the Bible, all the potential that Jesus Christ had. He had all these powers. He could do these amazing things. There was limitless potential, in other words. You see, this character is the embodiment, and then he's no longer has those potentials, you know, as an embodiment. So it's like, it's all a symbolic thing. He had to die for it to be a deity, in other words. But they keep perpetually keeping us in a loop with that imagery of, and the backdrop. But the word represent carries a connotation that's developed through lack of recognition of how the word's constructed and the definition thereof, and how it's pronounced the way we pronounce it. And this is representing this. This person represents this group of people. It's like an after effect. It's ironic because the way the word represent is presented gives you the way that you go about it developing dynamics of the pictures you paint in your mind. It's like it's really representing something that's already been, like the embodiment of something else. But everything has two sides that way. Every single thing is that way because it's all a happening. It's all actually verbs. It's a matter of perception that goes beyond grammar and vernacular and tonal phonetics. Before going any further, I want to mention the word represent and how you can pronounce it as represent, and how that's much of what goes on knowingly and unknowingly everywhere you look, and how it's done accidentally and on purpose, and sometimes subliminally. It's sometimes found on a personal level, sometimes found on a theatrical level, media level, social level, nature level. So it's all about how you present things, in other words. That's why perception is so important. So with that in mind, there's only so much you can talk about with one frame of reference. It's like the endless multiplication conundrum that's apparently represented through the Mad Hatter, the table. They all keeps coming up with these various ways of saying the same shit, and it's like there's a principle to it, in other words. And where there's principle, there's precedent. And that is what continues to support the reality and maintain the vibration of the operations and the little shows that are put on, and everything runs how it runs. Everything represents things, like they put the face on the money, and it's happening here, it's happening there, and it's just it keeps going on because the truth's there already. People see it, they don't give a shit. It's too much of it out, too much of it going. delve a little further into this presence of grace that I speak of, and how when being a neutral observer, you try your best to live in accordance with the presence of grace. And in order to live in the presence of grace, you have to see it as a deity, just like everybody has their own sphere, their own aura, their own electromagnetic field. They're basically a walking world or a planet. Well, the presence of grace is a formless, shapeless, timeless, infinite deity, being, God, perhaps a piece of the Most High versus a creation of it, being as it is so intricate and complex and so unfathomable that you can't even keep it in your mind often enough to appropriately attribute it to anything. It's whatever's happening all the time. It's whatever you're looking at. It's God. It's the presence of grace. It's whatever label you want to put on it. It's a big happening, though. And it being the most powerful thing that we can perceive, everything mimics it as far as the dynamics of it. Because it being so broad and vast, it's impossible for that not to happen. So to live within it would be to be a neutral observer with the awareness of it being all around you and around everyone else simultaneously, and embodying itself through activities of other beings on the planet, creating things and doing things together and forming bonds between one another. And it's all a part of the presence of grace, which we have unknowingly limited and regimented and crucified and done all these horrible fucking things to, especially to people who have embodied such a force of benevolence that it gravitated towards more influential extensions of the presence of grace or God. So much has just been kept a secret that I feel at this point most of what I'm dealing with is a product of life just being a rite of passage in which I haven't completed. Like, some things you just don't figure out till you die. And I damn sure am not implying that I know everything there is to know. I'm nowhere even close to even considering that. I'm way in the dark, way in the woods. Super ignorant, don't get me wrong. It's just certain questions you can live a whole lifetime and never answer, but doesn't mean they don't have an answer. That's what I'm saying. And it's like a rite of passage. It's like, I think that certain questions you just don't know till you die, or you think you die. Whatever you want to say happens, and then you're re-embodied or respawned or born again or rebirthed or whatever. All these terms that you constantly hear and are symbolized, and then you live with that consciousness. But there's limitations that come with that consciousness in order to keep the rite of passage the way it is. And that's just a theory, but it's where it comes from, you know. It's where these things come from, whether they be true or false or off base. It's the dynamics. There's a truth in it when it comes from a certain place within me, and with me listening back to it, and I find it. I want to jump back off of the personal note of things, step back to wrapping up that spiritual, religious tangent I ended up getting on about evil running the world through malevolence, manipulating benevolence, and siphoning off the infinite power by hiding and guarding certain knowledge about the nature of the universe and how it interacts with our behavior. I want to point out that as far as the evil ruling the world, that is a perception. It's not the planet, space, and the creator being the Most High, way smaller version, more personal level of detail in relation to society and social engineering. Because When I say world, I'm referring to a shared reality, a consensus of agreements upon certain beliefs which direct our conduct in such a way to create differing perceptions that share the same core to ensure certain things continuing to operate. So within that reality that we perceive, that's been cultivated and supported and guarded, it creates something that I call a world in which we could knowingly or unknowingly have our own world running simultaneously. It's just a new tier level of labels as far as the situation and circumstances in the scenario of having your own perception or sharing the perception of other people having one of you, in which you'll lose your own, which ultimately I don't see how individualism would survive within you unless it would be a farce that you're not aware of after that, especially if it unknowingly happens. Whenever I'm speaking of the dynamics of the world we live in, I'm speaking on the consensus of the core of the base of the reality that we all morph into or assimilate into being with our reality individually or in a hive. It's like this, like you have to look at it like when you see oil congealing into these little bubbles. It's like it's all the same substance, but it's separated into these larger and smaller circles. That's a tangible replicated version that you could see physically represented as far as the way consciousness is working right now. It's just a big game, really, to say it's this is this and that is that. It's really all just the same material. It's just congealed in different areas on top of something, and it's all to ensure that separation that's created from the top and the bottom.